Gunner, Legends from the Arms Factory, Part 1. The Dark Fortress, 1886. Why would a weapons factory build a football club? And what did they ignite when they kicked their first ball? The air in Woolwich in 1886 was thick with soot and smoke. Located in the southeastern corner of London, it was an industrial heartland, gritty, grimy, and home to one of Britain's most important munitions factories, the Royal Arsenal. Here, thousands of workers toiled daily crafting weapons for the British Empire. Cannons, rifles, gunpowder shells, in an atmosphere dominated by noise, pressure, and discipline. Among them were men who spent 10 to 12 hours a day laboring over steel and fire, yet carried something more in their hearts, a love for football. To most, it was just a diversion, a brief escape from the clang of machines and the burdens of survival. But to a small group of workers in the Dial Square workshop, it was something more. It was the beginning of a dream, on a cold December day. That dream took its first breath. David Danskin, a young, charismatic Scot with a fierce kick and stronger conviction, gathered a handful of fellow workers during their lunch break. "Lads," he said, eyes gleaming, "what if we formed our own football club? Not just for kicks, but for something real, something that can belong to us." The others laughed at first. A team in Woolwich? Who would they even play against? But Danskin's passion was infectious. That night, in the cramped confines of the Dial Square workshop, they scraped together enough to buy a ball. 6 pence. Here, a shilling there, each coin a symbol of belief. On December 11th, 1886, they played their first match against Eastern Wanderers. The scoreline? A staggering 6-0 win. They called themselves Dial Square, after the heart of their factory, a small tribute to their origins. But more importantly, they had discovered something powerful. Unity. Word spread quickly. Other factories scoffed. Some even mocked them for thinking they could be more than just workers. Management at Royal Arsenal wasn't pleased either. "You're paid to build weapons," one supervisor snapped. "Not chase after a ball like children." But the workers refused to stop. Within weeks, Dial Square rebranded as Royal Arsenal, proudly wearing the factory's name on their chests. Their matches started drawing crowds, first a dozen, then hundreds. And with every goal scored, they fired another shot not of war, but of identity. It wasn't easy. The pitches were often muddy wastelands. They had no uniforms, only shared shirts. They changed in pub backrooms and washed in freezing water. But every match was a declaration. We are not just tools in a factory. We are players, dreamers, fighters. Then came the first true test. Eastern Wanderers challenged them to a rematch, this time on a real pitch with referees and stakes. Rumors swirled that if Royal Arsenal lost, the club would be disbanded under factory orders. Danskin knew what was on the line. He rallied his teammates. "They think we're fools with boots. Let's show them what factory men can do when we fight not with weapons, but with will." The game was brutal. Rain turned the field to slush. One player dislocated his shoulder. Another bled from a cleated stomp. But they held firm. A last-minute goal, a screamer from 30 yards, sealed a 2-1 victory. The roar from the sidelines that day echoed far beyond the muddy pitch. It reached pub halls, factory floors, and even local papers. The Royal Arsenal Football Club was here to stay. But even as the crowds grew, so did the challenges. Some in management called for a ban on after-hours football. Injuries were affecting productivity. Tensions rose. There were whispers of players being punished with reduced wages. And still, they played on. Because for the men of Dial Square, this wasn't just football. It was rebellion. It was pride. It was escape. And unknowingly, with every kick, they were building something far greater than goals or glory. They were building Arsenal. Part 2. A name forged in steel. A name can be a label. or it can be a declaration of pride, of defiance, of destiny. The name Royal Arsenal echoed through the industrial alleys of Woolwich with newfound power. It wasn't just a badge. On a chest, it was a statement. And in the smoke-filled pubs and factory corners, people began to whisper, these weren't just workers anymore. They were warriors of a different kind. As crowds swelled at their matches, so did opposition. Rival teams resented their quick rise. Factory bosses warned of distractions. Yet Royal Arsenal charged ahead. Fueled by defiance. In 1887, they moved to a new ground, the Manor Ground in Plumstead. The terrain was poor, but it was theirs. They paid rent out of their own pockets, fixed fences by hand, and painted goalposts late into the night. It was gritty, hard, and honest. Just like them, but success bred ambition. And ambition sparked friction. A divide began to form within the club. One side wanted to remain true to their roots, a team of workers for workers. The other dreamed of turning Royal Arsenal into something more professional, something bigger. David Danskin, once the beating heart of the team, found himself caught in the middle. At night, he walked alone across the muddy pitch, wondering, can we grow without selling out? In 1891, the club made a bold move. They became the first Southern club to turn professional. It was a groundbreaking step and a controversial one. The amateur football establishment saw it as a betrayal. Other clubs boycotted them. Friendly matches were canceled. Even the Football Association hesitated to embrace them fully. But Royal Arsenal did not retreat. They recruited better players, trained harder, and played fiercer. They crushed rivals on the pitch and won respect through sheer force of will. Crowds began to chant their name not just with support, but with belief. Then came another challenge. A legal dispute arose over the name Royal, a title traditionally reserved for institutions with formal royal endorsement. It was a petty move by their critics, but it forced the club to rebrand once again. And so, in 1893, they became Woolwich Arsenal. It was a compromise. The name retained its industrial soul, rooted in Woolwich, but dropped the controversial Royal. Yet within the club, the name change triggered an identity crisis. Some players saw it as a loss of pride. Others saw it as evolution. The press was divided. One newspaper quipped, from royal to regional, Arsenal trades a crown for coal dust. But the fans, the working men and women who stood in the rain every weekend, didn't care what the club was called. To them, it was still their Arsenal. Their pride. Their rebellion in boots. Woolwich Arsenal joined the Football League Second Division in 1893. It was a monumental achievement, the first club from the South to do so, and they earned it not with privilege, but persistence. Every match was a war, not just against opponents, but against doubt, fatigue, and the burden of expectation. The club's finances were tight. Travel was expensive. Injuries piled up. Yet Woolwich Arsenal survived, because the fire that forged their name, whether Dial Square, Royal Arsenal, or Woolwich Arsenal, had always burned from the same place: steel, sweat, spirit. Part 3. The Exodus to Highbury. When survival demands sacrifice, even the strongest roots must be pulled from the ground. By the dawn of the 20th century, Woolwich Arsenal was running out of time. The team had heart, but the money was drying up. The crowds were loyal, but small. Located deep in industrial southeast London, Plumstead was hard to reach, a forgotten corner for fans in a rapidly growing city. The club's financial troubles worsened in 1910, with mounting debts and poor attendance. The future of Woolwich Arsenal looked bleak. Talks of liquidation began to circulate. But from the edge of extinction came an unlikely savior. Enter Sir Henry Norris, a wealthy property developer and chairman of Fulham FC. Ambitious and shrewd, Norris saw an opportunity where others saw ruin. He proposed a radical idea: move Woolwich Arsenal north of the River Thames to Highbury in Islington. The reaction was explosive. Fans in Woolwich were devastated. Protests erupted. "Traitors," some shouted. Decades of community support were being abandoned. But Norris argued, better hated in Highbury than dead in Plumstead. The move went ahead in 1913. Highbury was a leafy, middle-class neighborhood, a world away from the smoky factories of Woolwich. Some called it betrayal. Others called it rebirth. The new stadium, Arsenal Stadium, was modest but ambitious. It had stands, proper seating, and even plans for future expansion. It was a fresh canvas, but with it came new expectations. Woolwich was dropped from the name. The club became simply Arsenal. It was a declaration of reinvention, a name that didn't need explanation, only recognition. But many supporters felt the soul of the club was lost in the move. The working-class identity, the gritty origins all risked being paved over by North London glamour. On opening day in Highbury, a small group of Woolwich fans stood in silence outside the gates, holding a banner. "You took our club, but not our memories." Inside, Arsenal lost their first home match 2-1. It seemed like an omen. New land, new name, but the same old struggles. And yet, the seeds had been planted. Highbury would become a fortress. Arsenal would grow into giants. But first, they would have to prove that the sacrifice, the exodus, was worth it. Part 4. Chapman's Revolution. Sometimes one man walks in, and history starts to run. When Herbert Chapman took over Arsenal in 1925, the club was drifting. Highbury was full, but the trophy cabinet was bare. The team played with spirit, but without strategy. Arsenal needed more than a manager. They needed a visionary. Chapman was that, and more. He arrived from Huddersfield, town with back-to-back league titles and a reputation for genius. But what he found in North London wasn't promising. An inconsistent squad, a fan base hungry for glory, and a board wary of radical change. Chapman didn't flinch. He rewrote everything. Training schedules, tactical formations, diets, kit design, travel routines, even the matchday program. Most notably, he introduced a tactical system that would become legendary, the WM formation. It was revolutionary, balancing defense and attack in a way the English game had never seen. Where others saw 11 individuals, Chapman saw geometry. "Football is not just energy," he once said. "It is movement, space, and timing." But change brought resistance. Players grumbled about the rigorous training. Fans questioned his unorthodox tactics. Reporters called his approach too mechanical. One even wrote, "Chapman wants robots." Football needs artists. Yet Chapman's faith never wavered. He demanded discipline, recruited smartly, and slowly built a new culture. He signed Alex James, a mercurial Scottish playmaker, and transformed him from a soloist into a conductor. He discovered Cliff Baston, a teenage winger who would become a club legend. He brought in Tom Parker, Eddie Hapgood, and David Jack, forming the spine of a future dynasty. In 1930, Arsenal reached the FA Cup final. They faced Chapman's former club, Huddersfield. The stakes were poetic. For Chapman, it wasn't just a shot at silverware. It was a test of his revolution. The match was tight, tense, but in the 83rd minute, Arsenal sealed it. The final whistle blew. Arsenal 2-0 Huddersfield Town. For the first time in their history, Arsenal had won the FA Cup. The fans erupted. Highbury shook. Chapman stood on the touchline, arms folded, face calm, but his eyes were alight. It wasn't just victory. It was vindication, but he wasn't done. Over the next few years, Arsenal would dominate English football. League titles in 1931 and 1933. Another FA Cup final in 1932. The club wasn't just winning, it was transforming. Chapman modernized the club off the pitch too. He advocated for numbered shirts, white sleeves on red kits, and even pushed for the renaming of the local tube station to Arsenal, the only station in London. Named after a football club, he believed football clubs should be civic institutions, symbols of identity. And he made Arsenal one. But in 1934, tragedy struck. Herbert Chapman died suddenly of pneumonia at just 55. The football world mourned. At Highbury, fans gathered in silence. Flags flew at half-mast. Players wept out they had not just lost a manager, they had lost the man who had turned Arsenal into a powerhouse. Yet his legacy lived on. Arsenal won the league again that year, and again in 1935 and 1938. Chapman's blueprint had become Arsenal's DNA, from a worker's dream in Woolwich to a footballing empire in Highbury. Chapman was the architect of the transformation. He didn't just change Arsenal. He changed football. Part 5: War, Ruin, and the Rebuild. Even giants bleed. And even rubble remembers how to rise. The 1930s had ended in glory. Arsenal stood tall, champions, innovators, a model club in English football. But dark clouds gathered over Europe. And soon, the thunder of war drowned the roar of crowds. In September 1939, the Second World War broke out. Football, like everything else, was suspended. Highbury, once a theater of dreams, was transformed into an air raid precautions (ARP) station. Its gleaming stands and polished pitch now served as barracks, training grounds, and shelters. The chants of supporters were replaced by the shrill alarms of enemy bombers overhead. Many Arsenal players enlisted. Some never returned. The league system collapsed. In its place were regional competitions, unofficial, fragmented, and barely documented. Matches were played when possible, with squads cobbled together from soldiers on leave and local amateurs. Arsenal's golden age halted. The machine Herbert Chapman had built now sat rusting in the shadow of war. But the spirit never died. In every makeshift match, in every soldier wearing the red shirt under his uniform, the Arsenal flame flickered. Highbury suffered too. In 1941, bombs struck the North Bank stand. The damage was extensive, steel twisted, concrete shattered. Rebuilding was impossible during wartime. The once proud ground now stood wounded, symbolic of a nation torn apart. Yet amidst the chaos, Arsenal found a guardian. George Allison, Chapman's successor, kept the club alive through the war years. Tireless, passionate, and unwavering, he arranged matches, kept contact with players, and protected what remained of Arsenal's structure. He believed in one thing: we are more than a football club. We are part of the nation's soul. When the war ended in 1945, Britain emerged bruised but breathing. Football returned, cautiously at first, a reminder of joy, of unity, of life. And so did Arsenal. The first post-war seasons were difficult. The team was aging, the stadium was in ruins, money was tight. Fans returned to Highbury and wept at the sight, a once mighty coliseum, wounded by war, but from the ashes came resolve. The club hired Tom Whittaker as manager in 1947. Former player and longtime trainer who had learned under Chapman and Allison, he knew the Arsenal way. And more importantly, he knew how to rebuild. Whittaker reinvigorated the club with discipline and faith. He brought back professionalism. He believed Arsenal's soul was not in the bricks, but in the people, the style, the vision. In 1948, Arsenal won the league again. Thought it was more than a trophy. It was resurrection. The fans who had buried loved ones now had something to cheer. The players who had worn helmets now wore boots. Highbury, scarred but standing, hosted victory once more. In 1950, Arsenal lifted the FA Cup, defeating Liverpool at Wembley. 2 years later, they reached the final again. Though they lost to Newcastle, the message was clear. Arsenal was back. Back not just from sporting failure, but from national catastrophe. Other clubs had risen, yes. Rivals had grown stronger. But Arsenal had something no one else did: a legacy. Forged in war and reborn in peace. As the 1950s rolled on, Arsenal remained competitive, but their dominance dimmed slightly. They had rebuilt, but the next evolution was coming. Still, their journey through fire had proved one thing: even when bombed, broken, and bloodied, Arsenal endured. Because Arsenal was never just a club. It was an idea. Part 6. The long silence before the storm. Some battles aren't fought on fields, they're fought in waiting. The 1950s gave Arsenal a brief return to glory. But by the 1960s, the energy that once electrified Highbury began to flicker. Trophies dried up, hopes dimmed. A quiet gloom settled in. It wasn't failure, but something worse. Stagnation. Tom Whitaker passed away in 1956, and with his death, a guiding light of the post-war rebuild was gone. Arsenal entered a period of managerial uncertainty. Jack Crayston came and went, then George Swindon. Then Billy Wright, a national hero as a player, but inexperienced as a manager. Under Wright, Arsenal struggled. There were brief flashes. A memorable 4-4 draw against Spurs, a youth prospect dazzling here or there, but no consistent success. The team lacked identity. The game was changing. Arsenal wasn't. The press began to sneer. "The Gunners have become sleepers," one headline read. Once feared, now forgotten. Highbury remained full, but it was often out of habit, not hope. The marble halls echoed with tradition. But tradition couldn't win matches. Fans grew restless. The red and white still commanded respect, but the fear factor was fading. Rivals like Tottenham, Leeds, and Liverpool surged forward. Arsenal stood still. Behind the scenes, change brewed. In the youth ranks, a quiet revolution was forming. Young players like Charlie George, Pat Rice, and John Radford trained in silence, learning the Arsenal way but dreaming beyond it. In 1966, Bertie Mee, previously the club's physiotherapist, was appointed manager. It was a curious decision. He was methodical, clinical, quiet. Not the typical firebrand leader fans hoped for, but Bertie Mee had a plan. He surrounded himself with sharp football minds, including Dave Sexton and later Don Howe. He believed Arsenal didn't need a revolution. It needed rediscovery, discipline, unity, youth. The late 1960s saw signs of life. Arsenal reached 2 consecutive League Cup finals in 1968 and 1969, losing both. Heartbreaks, yes, but also hints of revival. In training, the young squad was growing sharper, hungrier. The silence that had haunted Highbury was turning into tension, the kind. Before a storm. In 1970, a new campaign began. Arsenal entered the Intercities Fairs Cup, a precursor to the UEFA Cup. The competition wasn't prestigious by modern standards, but for a club starved of glory, it was a spark. They battled through the rounds, gritty wins, narrow escapes. And finally, in the 2-legged final, they faced Anderlecht. The first leg was a disaster, a 3-1 defeat in Belgium. The press was brutal. Another Arsenal collapse. But the players weren't reading headlines. At Highbury, under the floodlights, they roared back. Ray Kennedy, John Radford, and John Samuel scored. Arsenal won 3-0. They lifted their first European trophy in front of a packed, thunderous home crowd. For the first time in 17 years, Arsenal had silverware. But more importantly, they had momentum. The silence was over. The storm was coming. Part 7. The double that shook England. When history calls, the young must answer like legends. The 1970 Fairs Cup triumph lit a spark, but few could predict it would ignite a firestorm the following season. The taste of European victory had sharpened Arsenal's hunger. The silence of the past decades had been broken. Now the roar was back. And in 1971, it erupted. The season began with quiet confidence. Arsenal's squad, a blend of hardened pros and fearless youth, had matured. Frank McLintock captained the team with iron leadership. Pat Rice embodied Arsenal grit. Ray Kennedy and George Graham offered balance. And then there was Charlie. George, wild-haired, unpredictable, electric. Under Bertie Mee and tactical mastermind Don Howe, Arsenal began their league campaign with precision. They were efficient, not flashy, grinding out narrow wins, defending with discipline, and striking when it mattered most. They climbed the table quietly, like a storm creeping on the horizon. Meanwhile, the FA Cup run gathered steam. Each round was a test of nerve, replays, late goals, tense away fixtures, but Arsenal advanced. Fans began to whisper, could this be the year? Could they win both? No London club had ever done the double, winning both the league and FA Cup in the same season. It was the realm of dreams. Yet Arsenal kept winning. In May 1971, it all came down to a single, fateful week. First, the league. Arsenal needed a win against bitter rivals Tottenham Hotspur at White Hart Lane to clinch the title. The tension was volcanic. Spurs fans mocked, sang, roared. Arsenal stood stoic. The match was tight, goalless until the 88th minute. Then, a corner. Ray Kennedy rose, powered the ball home. Arsenal 1-0. Champions. At Tottenham's ground. Of all places, the final whistle sounded and the away end exploded. History had been made, and humiliation served to their fiercest rivals. It was poetic, savage, unforgettable, but Arsenal wasn't done. 5 days later, the FA Cup final. Opponent, Liverpool. Venue, Wembley. Stakes, immortality. The match was grueling. Liverpool struck first in extra time. Highbury Hearts sank. Then Eddie Kelly equalized, and Charlie George, the boy from Islington, sealed it with a thunderbolt. He scored. He ran. He collapsed onto the Wembley turf, arms outstretched, a living statue of triumph. Arsenal 2-1 Liverpool. The double was complete. Highbury wept. North London danced. England watched, stunned. From physiotherapist to double-winning manager, Bertie Mee had engineered the unthinkable. The Gunners were no longer just storied, they were supreme. A club forged in fire, hardened by war, and shaped in silence had now conquered all. But football is never satisfied. The next chapters would be darker. But for now, in that glorious summer of 1971, Arsenal stood on top of the world. Part 8. Fall from the summit. The higher the peak, the colder the wind. After the glory of 1971, Arsenal stood as kings. But sustaining greatness is often harder than reaching it. The celebrations faded, and with them, the cohesion that had brought Arsenal to the mountaintop began to fray. The first cracks appeared in the dressing room. Bertie Mee, the architect of the double, found it difficult to evolve. His rigid discipline, once effective for a hungry squad, began to chafe against growing egos and the changing culture of the 1970s. Players who had bled for the shirt were aging, and replacements failed to reach the same heights. George Graham left. Then Frank McLintock. Even Charlie George, the Wembley hero, grew disillusioned and departed after clashing with Mee. The momentum was gone. Arsenal finished 5th in the league the following season, then 10th, then 16th. Once feared, they became inconsistent. Matches at Highbury felt muted, the roar replaced by grumbles. The FA Cup final of 1972, lost to Leeds, offered a bitter taste of what could have been. A year later, Arsenal failed to make a serious title challenge. The magic of '71 now felt like a fading photograph. In 1976, Bertie Mee stepped down. His reign had brought the highest of highs, but ended in exhaustion. His successor, Terry Neal, brought fresh energy and some hope. He made bold moves, notably signing Malcolm MacDonald and promoting a brilliant young Irish midfielder named Liam Brady. Brady was different, elegant, visionary, fearless. Fans adored him. He carried the ball like a poet and struck it like a painter with a brush. With Brady at the heart, Arsenal began to climb again. In 1978, they reached the FA Cup final and lost to IPSWICH. In 1979, they returned, and this time they triumphed. Arsenal 3-2 Manchester United. A chaotic, glorious final. They led 2-0. United pulled level. Then in the dying moments, Alan Sunderland poked home the winner. Wembley erupted. Arsenal had another cup. A new generation had something to celebrate. But the league title remained elusive. In 1980, Arsenal made it to both the FA Cup final and the European Cup Winners' Cup final. They lost both. 2 finals. No silver. It was symbolic. A decade of nearlies, maybes and missed chances. And soon after, Liam Brady left, lured away to Juventus. His departure felt like the closing of a chapter. The 1980s loomed uncertain, unforgiving. Arsenal was still a giant, but one with tired legs and a heavy crown. The fall from the summit was complete. But in the shadows, something new was stirring. Part 9. George Graham's Iron Fist. Discipline is not the enemy of flair, it's the foundation of greatness. By the mid-1980s, Arsenal was drifting. The once great club had become a faded echo, respectable, but rarely feared. The hunger of the double years had given way to inconsistency, underachievement, and mid-table mediocrity. Then came George Graham, a former Arsenal player from the 1971 double side. Graham returned to Highbury in 1986, not as a nostalgic symbol, but as a man on a mission. He wasn't interested in sentiment. He wanted results. From the moment he stepped into the manager's office, the tone changed. Players were put on notice. Training was intensified. Discipline became non-negotiable. If you didn't work, you didn't play. If you didn't listen, you were gone. Fans and pundits were skeptical. Graham was young, relatively inexperienced. But within months, Arsenal began to look different, sharper, hungrier, more structured. He bled the old squad and built a new core around youth and steel. Tony Adams, David Rocastle, Michael Thomas, Paul Merson. These weren't global stars yet, but they were fearless, loyal, and ready to fight. In 1987, Graham delivered his first trophy, the League Cup, beating Liverpool 2-1. It wasn't just a win. It was a warning shot. Arsenal was back. Graham's philosophy was simple: defend as a unit, strike with purpose. His back four, anchored by Tony Adams, became legendary. They moved as one, a wall of red and white precision. The 1988-89 season brought the ultimate validation. Arsenal were chasing Liverpool, who dominated English football. Heading into the final game at Anfield, Arsenal needed to win by 2 clear goals to take the title. No one believed they could do it. Not at Anfield, not against Liverpool, not with everything on the line. But George Graham believed. The match unfolded like a scriptwriter's dream. Alan Smith scored early, but time ticked away. The title seemed to slip. Then in stoppage time, Michael Thomas surged forward. A through ball. One touch. And then Thomas, charging through the midfield. It's up for grabs now. He scored. Arsenal 2-0 Liverpool. The title was theirs. In the final minute. In the most dramatic finish in English football history. It wasn't just a championship. It was a resurrection. Graham had dragged Arsenal from the fog of the past into the blaze of new glory. In 1991, Arsenal won the league again, losing only one match all season. The defense was nearly impenetrable. They were called boring. Graham didn't care. He wanted winners, not entertainers. But behind the scenes, cracks began to form. His obsession with control tightened. Creativity was stifled. Rumors swirled of backroom tensions. And in 1995, scandal broke. Graham was found guilty of accepting illegal payments during player transfers. The club had no choice. George Graham, the man who restored Arsenal's steel, was sacked. It was a bitter end to a golden era. But his legacy was undeniable. He had rebuilt Arsenal, not with flair, but with fire. The Iron Fist had forged a new foundation, and in its wake, a new visionary was about to arrive. Part 10. Arsene's Revolution. He didn't just change Arsenal. He changed football. When Arsene Wenger arrived at Arsenal in 1996, many asked the same question. Arsene who? He was the first foreign manager in the club's history. Quiet, intellectual, and largely unknown in English football. But he carried with him a philosophy that would shatter tradition and redefine what Arsenal stood for. He didn't walk into Arsenal. He rewrote it. Gone were the days of rigid discipline and 1-0 wins. Wenger brought fluidity. He brought freedom. He brought finesse. Out went stodgy routines. In came nutrition plans, new training methods, psychological coaching. English football mocked it first. Then they watched and learned. On the pitch, he crafted a team of elegance and precision. He inherited talents like Tony Adams, Dennis Bergkamp, and David Platt, and fused them with French flair. Patrick Vieira, Emmanuel Petit, Nicolas Anelka. In 1998, Wenger led Arsenal to the double, the league title and the FA Cup in his first full season. It was fast. It was beautiful. It was revolutionary. The critics were silenced, but Wenger was just beginning. He built a dynasty around Thierry Henry, Robert Pires, Freddie Ljungberg, Sol Campbell, and Ashley Cole. They played football like no English team had ever done. Fast, technical, ruthless. Then came 2003-04. The INVINCIBLE. Arsenal went the entire Premier League season, unbeaten, 26 wins, 12 draws, 0 losses. A feat unmatched in modern English football. Their style was poetry in motion. Their mentality was steel. They destroyed records. They mesmerized fans. They terrified opponents. Arsenal had not just returned to glory. They had ascended to legend. Off the pitch, Wenger oversaw the construction of the Emirates Stadium, ensuring the club could compete financially with Europe's elite. It meant lean years, selling stars, rebuilding constantly, but he kept Arsenal in the Champions League for 20 consecutive seasons. No trophies could ever fully define him, because Wenger's gift wasn't just silverware, it was identity. He made Arsenal global, respected, beautiful. But time, as ever, is undefeated. The latter years brought decline. Rival clubs spent more. Wenger's ideals, once revolutionary, began to feel outdated in a football world that prized money over magic. In 2018, after 22 years, Wenger stepped down. Fans wept. Some cheered. But all knew an era had ended. Wenger had arrived as a stranger. He left as a legend. From Woolwich to Highbury to Emirates, from factory workers to invincibles. From war to Wenger ball, the story of Arsenal is not one of names or trophies. It is the story of evolution. And through it all, one thing remains: the name. Arsenal. Unshaken, unbroken, undying. Thank you for watching today's story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next episode.